But I don't want to see. Okay, Delaney.
If you're a woman watching this video, you might have a story like this already. When I first moved to England, I decided nothing ventured, nothing gained, I'm gonna get into the dating scene. I set up a profile, and pretty quickly, I found a guy who seemed right up my alley. Yeah, a real one. We get together in the city for drinks after chatting for a few days and confirming that he's a real man who exists, and it's going pretty well. He's cute, he's nice, we have a lot in common, we're making good conversation. A few hours go by into the evening, and it's not the greatest date ever, but it's moving comfortably. And all of a sudden, I'm like mid-sentence about something really dumb, and he hurtles over the table and kisses me. Not even in a hot way, just right back into his seat like a jack-in-the-box. No idea how to respond to this. Kind of flattered. Kind of freaked out. Not panicked enough yet to run out on this date. But all of a sudden, he starts getting really pushy about how his friends have a pub down the road and we should totally move the date down there, and I'm far enough away from home or any of my friends that the alarms start going off. Why is he rushing me? How much longer can I be on this date? What if this puts me too far from my train station for me to get back home in time? And even more concerning, how can I trust him that where he says we're going is where he actually wants to take me? If it really is his friend's pub, how do I know I'm going to be in a safe place with them? Why should I put my physical safety in this person's hands when they've already publicly acted in a way that kind of made me feel uncomfortable? I say, nope, I gotta catch my train. He walks me to the bus station, we hug and say nice to meet you, and I book it straight the hell out of London. And I felt so awful nasty rancid at the end of the night that I haven't gone on another date in 3 years. Yeah! At the end of the day, nobody got physically hurt. But whether I actually dodged a bullet or this guy was just doing a terrible job at making me feel comfortable, the anxiety I was feeling at the time didn't exist in a vacuum. We've been in a post-Me Too world for over a decade now, and those shared experiences reveal a lot about how much women are taught from a young age to anticipate potentially dangerous attention from men in any situation, which can reinforce harmful ideas about whose fault the violence is, or how much responsibility a woman has in the equation. It was like this for your mom, and it was like this for your grandma. Odds are pretty good that it was 10 times worse. But to survive, misogyny, like any social illness, sheds its skin and takes new forms to adapt to modern sensibilities. It has to find new rhetoric, new tactics, even if the root language remains the same. The only catch is that the more power it loses in society at large, the angrier it becomes. And a whole lot of Hollywood hacks trying to ride Jordan Peele's coattails heard that and thought it sounded like a great setup for a horror movie. What we're talking about today is not just any horror film from any period with any amount of social commentary on feminism, or one where a male antagonist is menacing a female protagonist, or even just having a female protagonist. You can obviously dissect many, many horror films and tropes through the lens of gender and social anxiety, especially when it comes to the history of slashers, but if we're just going off a woman is attacked by a man, we are truly going to be here all damn day. When I coined the term man-bad horror, I mean it specifically in reference to films in the horror thriller genre, which use the recent boom in social horror to target the anxieties of the Me Too era. Increased awareness of how unpredictable sexual assault, domestic violence, or workplace harassment can be, exacerbated by the fear of what patriarchal institutions will protect to prioritize the well-being of male perpetrators over female victims. Now take that already relatively thin category and narrow it down even further to the shitty ones. That is man-bad horror. As the son of a mother and the brother of a sister, I've noticed women getting mistreated. And that's bad. We should be talking about how that's bad. Not enough people are talking about how men treat women bad. Maybe. Man... bad? In the biz, we call that the Somerton effect, baby. Now let's not get turned around. My complaints are not ideological. If you hate these films because you are the person they're criticizing, boy, I would bail on this essay now unless you're seeking out some hard truths.
Hi, pigs!
Outwardly, nothing is being said that I necessarily disagree with, though I may have many, many quibbles with how they choose to say it. But to tweak a phrase from Into the Woods, right is different than good. Unfortunately, personally agreeing with a film does not make it a competent film. I think Emerald Fennell's Promising Young Woman is a really good example of this effect, since it sells itself as a social thriller, but really just winds up being a series of Twitter threads clunkily adapted into scene form. Here's my misogynistic belief. That's cool. I'm gonna fake an assault to prove why you're wrong. It's fine to the extent that if it served as a wake-up call to any viewers about how many ways the system can fail victims of sexual crimes, or how many different forms its perpetrators and enablers can take, I won't really knock it for that. It's not giving anyone misleading or just straight-up wrong information about the thing it's trying to discuss. But the problem is, if you already know all of this, watching a mediocre movie that's hiding behind being technically right to co-opt the moment is all around a bit underwhelming. Like, boy, sure, drop that truth bomb, Slayer.
Oh, I'm saying it!
Get Out was a game changer for the horror genre in two ways. The first, obviously, was that it ushered in a new wave of topic horror we're still riding to this day, for better or worse. For every heretic, which halted development for 10 years so its writers could study literally every branch of theology, there's a Karen, which is about a scary Karen. Or an Antebellum, which takes such bold positions as the only way to process the modern Black experience in America is through slavery? Make no mistake, this was not the invention of topic horror. All art is political, all horror is political, every ideological anxiety has had its moment in horror across the past century of film. But what statements were radical in 1950 are kind of white bread in 2024. Because as society changes, so does art and trend and audience. And the form that commentary takes shifts, especially as the nature of commentary and the prevalence of social justice movements develop in the internet age. Because the second was that Get Out got nominated for, and in one category, won, a murderer's row of major awards at the Oscars. A baton, which was passed, depending on how you would categorize Parasite, though it definitely didn't hurt, to Promising Young Woman. Promising Young Woman is firmly more thriller than horror, and even that's a bit generous. But the message here, at least the way big studios seemed to interpret it, is that you can make a scary mass appeal movie and awards heavyweight if it's capital A about something. And as with anything promising, it was ruined by the fucking British.
Green Man is saving your life right now, bro. Just go with the flow.
Alex Garland's Men is probably the closest in this study to being passable. I actually hesitate to call it outright bad, because that would erase the fact that the first 2/3 of this film are setting up something interesting. It's quiet and uncomfortable, and it does a decent job portraying how hard it is to process trauma under the constant pressure of male attention. A force which doesn't only seem to be inescapable, but at times primordial. The dialogue is pretty heavy-handed, the characters are non-existent, and it might not have been much of a masterpiece, but had it stuck to its guns, it would have come out the other end largely okay.
Samuel is a deeply troubled boy.
Instead of what it actually did, which was trip over its own dick at the finish line. Okay, the seed goes in, and, the bowl. All right, we're back to the bowl. Fountain, baptism, we're back, the bird? We're to the bird? Okay, are we, is he fucking the dead bird? Religious repression, where, no, okay, why are we in the car? Why are we out of the car? Why is that a Skygina? No, stop! Ah! You know how you'll be watching a superhero movie and they just whip out the giant sky beam? Because I guess the assumption is you're such a dumb donkey that you can't focus without the scene cutting back to a big, ugly CGI laser every 3 minutes. Well, this is that for A24 movies. You'd think that the film being kind of slow would actually work in its favor. Jessie Buckley's previous psychological horror film, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, is built around untethering its audience with shifting characters and environments at an excruciating pace. But in practice, it's just kind of Alex Garland's McDonald's play place of how he interprets different ways men are socially enabled to unburden their own shortcomings on women, none of which last long or happen regularly enough to feel like it's earned a wacky naked tree guy. Okay, let's be fair, you can get a reading of the finale that makes a little more sense thematically if you have the context of the Green Man, which people in the UK might, but most people in the US definitely didn't.
That guy's beating on the frenetic. Dude, is that a hate crime?
Invoking some ancient visual metaphor for masculinity, which takes new forms across time and culture and, propagates itself. But even if you track this climax beat by beat to form some vaguely coherent explanation of what Harper is experiencing, even a good explanation, the issue remains that in practice it commits the same crime it accuses men of perpetuating. Sympathetic as it may be, this is still some form of unburdening the weight of toxic manhood onto women. It comes off less about the women in the audience, or even just Harper the character, and much more about how Alex Garland the director needs us to know he feels about the subject. But one can make the strong counter-argument that maybe the target audience isn't women who won't have much to take away from this experience. Reviewing the film for Wired, Eric Ravenscraft debates whether its real priority is to startle its male viewers out of complacency, and how what is arguably the clever approach to the problem can still be rendered completely useless.
The film feels designed to head off arguments from those who would be dismissive of what it has to say. This is evident even in the trailer, like when an officer tells Harper he's skeptical that the man who was stalking her really was stalking her.
He was stalking me.
What makes you say that?
I saw him twice.
I don't know if he saw you once. It's not quite stalking, is it?
These moments highlight how skepticism, dismissal, and victim blaming help create the very horrific environment that many claim doesn't exist. Harper's fears aren't made up or all in her head. The horror is created by the collective refusal to take her concerns seriously. Men, then, is intent on screaming, "See? You can't ignore the dangers here." The film is right, of course, but it feels like it's screaming into a void.
The kind of men who don't already understand how women could feel unsafe around other men in seemingly harmless situations to the point where they get offended that they even would, are probably not going to go see a film with a poster with the word men in big red letters, where they don't anticipate being told anything more insightful than being a man is bad. They already think that Star Wars hates them. You are not going to win these guys over. But that is a big problem, because so much of this film seems to be designed to impart on a male audience why women's fears run as deeply as they do. Which is a creative and occasionally well thought out idea. The men all having the same face would put male viewers on edge in a way a full ensemble cast wouldn't. The isolated rural setting strips away any deniability based on where these crimes are assumed to happen. Omegaverse. But it's also a problem that a movie about how scary it is to be a woman is so focused on how the men in the audience will respond when it's not even guaranteed that they'll be present. So if they're not here, the people who are actually watching the movie, many of whom will be women, are expecting to walk away with a bit more than they do in the final product. And for women, this is relatable, but in the same way reading the Wikipedia page for your hometown is relatable. The Battle of the Frogs was a frog-related incident in the Connecticut colony town of Windham in 1754. On a summer night in June or July, the people of Windham were awakened by a mysterious loud noise whose source they could not identify. Fearing an attack, a scouting party was sent out to investigate. By the morning, it was discovered that the sound was American bullfrogs, hundreds to thousands of which were found dead in a nearby mill pond. Cool, I knew this! We're gonna keep exploring this as we go on, but cool, I knew this is truly the big stumbling block across the board, which you don't have to jump it, but if you can't, you have to have more in the tank than your hot new take.
Oh, I'm saying it!
And to its credit, what Men wants to do is put men in a position where they have to experience what women will look at and say, cool, I knew this, which technically is a creative approach to solving an unsolvable problem. But the amount of trust it puts in men to even show up for this conversation may have exposed its own internal biases a little bit. Before we assume that this idea is inherently undoable, there's a version of it that works, and it's Nosferatu. But that's because it deliberately contrasts the male lead being treated the way women have been for the first time in his life and breaking down, with his wife, who is still terrified of what's coming and definitely empathizes with him, but because she's lived through this for years, also has a bit of an attitude like, yeah, buddy, I don't know what to tell you.
Just a trifle foolish dream, just as your past fancies. Everything is well.
It portends something awful for us.
Lee!
You never listen! Well, where is it? Your money, your promotion, your house? Where is that which is so precious to you?
Ironically, showing this happening to a man who struggles to process it is way more effective than yet another woman screaming and running and then the movie turning around like, see? See, this reflects on you! Maybe it's more experimental, but it's not more effective. So no one wins points based on a good idea alone. But I guess between a rock and a hard place, I have slightly more grace for an interesting concept that flops than Edgar Wright beating me over the head with an ice pick screaming, see? Catcalling is bad! Showgirls is about a mysterious blonde starlet who rides into town with big dreams of performing on stage, only to learn that beneath the glittering lights of the city, the industry has a seedy, predatory underbelly, which feeds on women's vulnerabilities and ambitions to freely exploit their bodies, leaving thousands of silenced victims in its wake and making it seem impossible to survive with their innocence intact. Wait, hang on. Last Night in Soho is about a mysterious blonde starlet who I don't think anyone expects subtlety from Edgar Wright or even wants subtlety from Edgar Wright. Like, imagine coming to a serious film discussion with your hot take being, Miyazaki's great, but why is he so mad about the war? So maybe 2021's Last Night in Soho marrying this director with this topic was kind of a lost cause from the outset, but that doesn't make it any less disappointing that it fails, or any less annoying that it seems to believe it's any more contemporary and relevant than a Charles Dickens novel. Oi, oi, but it ain't safe for a pretty young thing like you to be wandering in these dark alleyways. Careful around that charming young rogue, Doctor Who. His pretty face hides a heart blacker than the Thames. I used to be young and beautiful like you, but now I'm a wasted old spinster haunted by the ghosts of my past. Now, unlike Men, this film actually has a female co-writer, Krysty Wilson-Cairns, and while it's certainly good that Wilson-Cairns had a voice in the project beyond woman, how that manifests in the final product feels a little bit shallow anyways. And by shallow, I mean Wilson-Cairns mentions how she brought up her own experiences with being sexually harassed in pubs and on the streets of London during their collaboration, and I wager Wright heard that and just assumed all he needed to do to make his movie authentic was plug those stories in like an anti-sexism button. Which in theory is not the worst angle at all. I think that first scene of Eloise's creepy encounter with a cab driver is where the modern day plotline is the most promising. Even if he isn't actually going to hurt her, the perceived threat of what could happen hanging over any slightly iffy interaction is still extremely real, especially as a woman in the city alone. And this specific guy, men, particularly older men, who truly do not seem to understand how their chummy behavior creeps girls out, is so endemic to the UK that for a moment it feels like Last Night in Soho will have something to actually say about how the horror of the past takes new insidious forms in the modern day. But instead of following that concept to its logical conclusion, focusing on how Eloise struggles to live on her own in the city while constantly being spooked by its residual trauma, all of the icky guy encounters on Eloise's end kind of vanish as soon as the flashbacks come into play. This is, in terms of non-hallucinations, the scariest thing that happens to Eloise for the majority of the film. The rest of it is running from Slender Man ghosts like a Doctor Who cold open.
That was quick.
Unlike Alex Garland, Edgar Wright has a built-in male fandom from his Cornetto days. He has a real chance of imparting something of value on the people watching this film, specifically because he is saying it. But when it comes to the present narrative, the real horror is how unbearably old he is.
How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
It's one thing for the flashbacks to be over the top, and don't worry, we're getting to the flashbacks. But boy is this Disney Channel original movie material with the mean girl named, I shit you not, Jocasta, truly some of the most grating, joyless material in any of Wright's films to date.
You know, like so famous in your work that you can literally just go by Kylie.
Minogue.
Jenna.
It would be one thing if this were going after a real problem in a jokey way. Lord knows there is a lot to be said about how some of the world's most infuriating people have co-opted mental health lingo.
You're like so brave. So brave.
But not only is this being played dead seriously, it demonstrates a severe lack of interest in how these problems are every woman's problems, even the ones you don't like. Why does Jocasta's dead mom give her less nuance than Eloise's dead mom? Why don't Jocasta's equally creepy guy encounters seem to matter as much as Eloise's? Why is the only person in the whole movie who spikes a girl's drink with party drugs one of the most basic, well-known tenets of predator behavior, Jocasta? Eloise also doesn't have much of a personality. They clearly don't want to pick a real mental illness to name drop and risk making anybody mad, so she just has trauma and causes trauma ghosts.
She didn't have your gift.
My gift.
She didn't feel things, see things like you do.
We do know she's loaded, considering she drops the equivalent of about 4,000 American dollars in a week on a new rental, a bleach/restyle, and a vintage coat. But the movie thinks it's got us fooled that she's just a poor country girl getting bullied by those rich bitches from Manchester.
We'll have dinner at the Criterion, like in the photo.
We didn't eat there, couldn't afford to. Just took a picture outside and went to a Wimpy.
Some of us live over here, Edgar. You're not fucking slick. The most identity she has is living vicariously through Sandy, which plays less like a girl obsessed with the truth and more like an extremely weird parasocial relationship with a murder victim. There's no nice way of saying this. Eloise comes off less Jessica Harper in Suspiria and more like one of those influencers who are obsessed with true crime so personally that they put up Home Alone traps in their hotel rooms or make DNA scrapbooks for when they get murdered. Not if, when, Eloise is literally running from the specter of Sandy's trauma. And while those unresolved horror stories really do make day-to-day life that much scarier to a point where you need to be proactive about your own personal protection, at a certain point, you have to step back and remember it is well and truly not your damage to adopt as your own. I did it! I survived the horrors. Bitch, you got high on the London Ghost Tour and killed Terrence Stamp. And speaking of Sandy, oh boy, Sandy.
Welcome to my kitchen. We have bananas and avocado.
When I drew the connection to Paul Verhoeven's 1995 disaster piece Showgirls at the top of the segment, I was only being half facetious. Obviously, the collective nast of the entertainment industry is kind of a dead horse by now, but as films like The Neon Demon or Perfect Blue demonstrate, you can still find interesting things to do even if it's not always the first time it's being said. There are ways to make a film unique, if not original. For example, where Showgirls is kind of played out narratively, it makes up for it in being mentally unhinged.
Thrust it! Thrust it! Come on, thrust it!
I've had dog food. Oh, I used to love doggy chow.
I used to love doggy chow too. I didn't fuck anybody.
I saw you! Man, everybody got AIDS and shit.
On paper, you've probably seen a million movies like Showgirls, but there are no other movies like Showgirls. It does not exist in the realm of reality as we know it. And a big part of why the film is such a gas is that it really thinks it's doing something here.
Every movie sets out to push buttons, particularly a Verhoeven picture, and we're definitely gonna push them.
Monkey alert! No! Monkey alert!
This movie is going to shock America. Last Night in Soho feels similarly gauche, but a film taking itself too seriously looks very different between 1995 and 2021. There is not nearly enough camp on hand to say what is a narrative as old and outdated as Les Miserables.
A lot of films of that period are about the darker side of Soho or of show business. You still have to question where they're coming from, because there's a lot of them which are more the sensationalistic ones that take this kind of punitive approach to the female characters. There's a lot of movies where it seems that the genre is, girl comes to London to make it big and is roundly punished for her efforts.
See, look over there, see? They're puppets. Because they're being used by men. It is really bananas to hear Wright and Wilson Cans gas themselves up, not even for subverting the formula, just doing the formula, but pointing and saying out loud, this is wrong and we don't agree with it.
Dance is a sin! Dance is a sin! Do not dance! No! No!
Like, I'm super confused on how I'm supposed to be in awe of the level of commentary I could have gotten from Frozen 10 years ago, or Sweet Charity 60 years ago. Hell, I could get it from Metropolis nearly 100 years ago. Did you know sex workers are people? Did you know about the male gaze? Did you know sometimes attractive men lie?
Oh, I'm saying it!
If this were actually being released in the era of Argento and Hammer horror, which Soho is clearly desperate to evoke, you can see it earning a passing grade. You watch something like Belladonna of Sadness from 73 and you're like, it's a bit messy by modern standards. Their heart's in the right place. It occupies about the space that it deserves, but it is 2020 goddamn one at this point, and both cinema and the conversation have very much evolved. It's gotta get way smarter or way stupider really fast. When Showgirl stumbles trying to make a point, and boy, it does really stumble, it recovers some goodwill at the end by remaining gloriously insane. Last Night in Soho is deadly serious. Last Night in Soho thinks it's got takes.
See? She's wearing a big bow! Because she's a gift! For men!
I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off. I do not believe that Last Night in Soho, a film which is specifically about witnessing and experiencing violent sexual crimes which are buried by history, is adequately willing to let its audience feel gross. One of the most prominent news stories in 2024 was the case of Gisèle Pelicot, a 72-year-old French woman who spent the back half of the year testifying in a trial against her ex-husband for an absolutely horrific level of sexual assault committed repeatedly across 10 years by over 70 men. Before you even get into the circumstances, which God knows I can't any further without sending this video straight to algorithm hell, those details alone are the kind of thing that makes your skin fucking crawl. And as impressive as it is that Pelicot demanded the trial be made public to force the world at large to confront what happened to her and change the dynamics of who is being made to feel shame, there is really no way to scrub out that nasty, awful feeling when you read what was done to her without her consent, which is kind of an instinctive response to a crime like this. When you face the facts head on, even in their least graphic form possible, it's gonna make you feel goddamn awful. Despite any present similarities to the Pelicot case, the one thing Last Night in Soho cannot bear to be is icky. It's too clean, it's too glittery, it's too skittish to face what an ugly thing it's choosing to portray. This is an original story, no one made them make a film about this. And because Eloise's safety as an observer never really feels at risk, like she's in her own reaction video, Sandy's trauma comes off as aesthetic. No one ever touches her or gets in her personal space. She's rarely messy or disheveled in a way that isn't somewhat attractive. Even covered in blood, she looks like a Murder Me Barbie doll. We really don't have to see what's happening to her on screen if you can get away with it, which many directors have and many directors will, but we at least have to feel it. And somehow, in spite of this being Wright at his most unsubtle, the lack of an emotional core means that where the pain needs to be, there's kind of just a hole. A really pretty, sparkly, go-go booted hole. Because Sandy, despite how much Soho insists otherwise, is really just a conduit for suffering. The film can act like it's flipping the script on how stories like hers are framed, but the film is wrong. Sandy has no dimensionality outside of being abused. She's there to be pretty, get exploited, and die, so a college student doesn't have sex with her boyfriend. Which, you know, someone who had done any research might have known one of the reasons survivors of any gender choose not to speak up is because having their trauma relitigated and scrutinized, almost being reduced to the pain someone else inflicted upon you, can be goddamn dehumanizing. Soho expects that we'll start to fuse Eloise and Sandy in our brains, fill in the blanks in Sandy's story with Eloise's reactions, but if that line is never truly blurred, which it's not, what actually happens is that Sandy has her trauma relitigated and scrutinized in such a way that she is reduced to the pain being inflicted upon her by both the characters and the film in general. But it's actually not that, because sometimes we see her looking sad about it. Great job, Edgar. Really, really helpful.
I know what you've been through.
How do you know?
The other problem with that is that so much of Me Too was about breaking down those kinds of myths about what assault looks like and who it happens to. How you present yourself is irrelevant. Whether you were looking sexy is irrelevant. Not that the particular stigma towards sex workers shouldn't be discussed, because it really should, but Soho doesn't seem to care about challenging that stigma in any meaningful way, or really going into the difference between sex work and human trafficking, or exploring the deep intersectional history of Soho's red light district, or even talking to one modern sex worker about their opinion of their job. So what's really being said about sex work that they weren't saying under the goddamn Hays Code? Speaking of the Hays Code, that ending is a hotbed of stale cheese, which, again, Sandy being alive and becoming a serial killer could be a fun twist if this movie were, 60 years older, but don't forget, this is a very important contemporary movie, so we have to explain every bit of visual imagery we've seen so you get the message through your thick, stupid skull before the climax, in case there is any way you've missed the point the movie's been screaming at you for the last hour and 45 minutes.
Try and forget all those men, their faces, or blank them out. Make like they were nothing.
See, it's a metaphor for men! And the metaphor for men is men!
Credit where it's due, Diana Rigg clearly has a better idea of what movie she's in than Edgar Wright does. But unfortunately, Edgar Wright's the one with the point to make. You are allowed to leave the question of was Sandy justified in murdering her Johns unanswered. Simply put, different people will have different interpretations, but Sandy is unambiguously being portrayed as the bad guy here, not just for killing all those guys, but then trying to murder Eloise and James after a wellness check based on a hallucination of a crime that didn't actually happen. It was a metaphor.
The girl did die up there, I suppose. The young me.
I was dead long before you were born, Conan, and I'll be dead long before you're dead.
It really muddies the waters in a way that feels regressive, you know? I personally don't think we should be writing the assault victim with the same level of moral nuance as, like, Shadow the Hedgehog. Look, not everyone wants to say kill sex predators in front of millions of people on Universal's dollar, and not every movie has to be a revenge flick, you know? We can be honest about what kind of damage unresolved trauma can do. But it's pretty safe to say this wibbly, everyone's bad middle of the road is not it. Well, maybe they had it coming, but you know, it is illegal to kill people. Sorry you turned evil and it's too late to save you and you have to die for your sins now.
There's a lot of movies where it seems the genre is Zell comes to London to make it big and is roundly punished for her efforts.
Once again, we return to the question of who is this for? Certainly, this is not a battle cry for survivors. Sure is easy to heal and move on when literally nothing happened to you. And I'm gonna be honest, most women do not need to be warned away from uncritically idealizing the past when we can put 2 and 2 together based on the fact that the present is still really bad. I don't think that subtweeting girls who do Twiggy cosplay is the answer, Edgar. It's a little rich coming from the spaced guy, that's all I'm saying. On the other hand, genuinely, no man is going to watch this film and assume it's got anything to say to them. Like, yeah, you know who really needs taken down a peg in the modern day? Rich white guys from the 60s. We all know James Bond was a massive creep. We do Baby It's Cold Outside discourse every Christmas. We've all met the John Lennon party guy. This is so deeply old news. And we spend so little time with Matt Smith before he digivolves into Snidely Whiplash that he just doesn't feel like a person who exists in real life. None of these Johns are people. Modern women, frankly, have much more to fear from a character like James. Not that James is secretly evil, just weirdly inoffensive in every way, but the scariest thing in the world is meeting a sweet, generous guy who encourages you to let him support you and presents himself as being safe and says all the right things and takes his time and then turns out to be a predator. But even if James's intentions are really nothing but pure, the fact that the thought never crosses Eloise's mind that he might be disingenuous after spending every night playing Alice in Misogyny Land means that Wright is probably not actually thinking about the psychological day-to-day ramifications of these anxieties. He's prioritizing whatever's easy and cool and gets him to the next Argento visual, and that oversight's accidentally given men a character they can use to check out of the conversation entirely. Well, good thing I'm not a Slender Man ghost, and I don't hire sex workers, so I'm clearly an ethical person by this film's standards. Women just need to find a nice guy, like James. Or me! As the film's best visual demonstrates, in the credits, London is really full of ghosts. You can't be in the city for more than 5 minutes without feeling its history pressing in on you, especially when so much of its old violence is still ringing across its present. And while Wright clearly found a great concept in there somewhere, he's deadlocked himself between a schlocky send-up and pure prestige horror so firmly that he can't genuinely commit one way or the other. He wants to do woke Suspiria, which is already redundant because Black Christmas exists, but he doesn't know enough on the subject outside of what he's learned about this from the movies to make that vision come alive in a way that feels authentic or even relatable to female audiences. It occurs to me that if you smoosh men in Soho together, you've got like one 7 or 8 out of 10 movie rather than 2 4 or 5s. The gap in each film which ultimately undoes them is where the other, maybe not perfectly, but nearly slots in cleanly enough to create a fuller picture. The relentless banality of male creepery Soho skims over to get to the juicy bits is men's most interesting hook. And vice versa, men's stabs at being a woman simulator might have benefited from a bit more of the urgency and claustrophobia mounting throughout Soho. As is, men is so focused on spooking the boys that it leaves the girls hanging, while Soho works itself up into a frenzy over, you guessed it, cool, I knew this. You can correctly argue that these very different directors were going for different things. I mean, to put it bluntly, nobody wants or expects Edgar Wright to make a slow burn cosmic horror like Annihilation. But I don't know, unless your autorial stamp is already partially founded on the exploitation of women as a symptom of a greater societal darkness, your priorities might be a bit fucked if you're clinging too firmly to your big boy director aesthetic to engage with the complicated dynamics of the thing you insisted you needed to talk about. So maybe the foundational issue is just a gender thing. Wright and Garland, well-intentioned as they may be, simply cannot step far enough outside of man-brain to understand the womanly plight, even with all of the facts on hand. If Wilson Cans had more space to work, or if this film had been directed by a woman with Wright producing, these ideas would have had the room they needed to flourish and play around without a man's internal biases suffocating the narrative, coming together to make a great piece of feminist horror. So the solution is only letting women make them. Right?
This is the face I did. This is the face
Okay, this is gonna sound crazy, but you guys remember all that wacky shit with Harry Styles and Olivia Wilde and the divorce and the spitting on Chris Pine and all that? Bonkers twist. Turns out they were also making a movie. Before we all panic, no, this is not a what if Don't Worry Darling is a secret masterpiece soapbox moment. Olivia Wilde's Stepford Wives riff is not good. It's not offensively terrible, because then maybe that would have made the hullabaloo make some kind of sense, but instead it's just clumsy and bad for the ordinary reasons films can be clumsy and bad, even with an interesting premise. If WandaVision was still disappointing, but for non-energy beam reasons. Seriously, this turned into such a WandaVision fanfic that they even poached its cast, which, to be fair, get that bag.
Oh, I was on a show for 10 years. Can I pay for my kids' healthcare? No! You were one of the ugly actors.
But I think it is interesting to compare the reasons why Don't Worry Darling, a film which was drafted by men but ultimately revised and helmed by women, doesn't work compared to the reasons its male-led contemporaries in the patriarchy Olympics don't either, and in which areas it at least is heading more in the right direction, even if it doesn't ultimately succeed. There is a strong through line about how antiquated patriarchal ideas can perpetuate themselves in the modern day and prey on seemingly healthy relationships. Toxic masculinity is toxic specifically because it isn't some genetically occurring instinct in all men. It feeds off insecurities to manifest across different ideologies and platforms. In the 2020s, those platforms look very much like Frank's show. Guys like Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson peddling pissy, hokey intellectualism to create some enlightened framework for conservative rhetoric. And even though the movie only narrowly predates it, there are connections to be drawn between the Victory Project and the new trad movement. Men grasping for an era of male control and affirmation to reckon with a period where control feels out of reach. A victory over progressive degeneracy.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
It also bears mentioning that in that trad movement, the men who idealize it are openly willing to do weird, creepy shit to pin down women who may have initially rejected them, with no self-awareness of how something being legal doesn't make it a cool or normal thing to do. Oh no, this cute career woman I've decided I'm fixated on isn't interested in going out. Sure would be a shame if my dad happened to have founded 5 airlines and I could just figure out what flight she's on, so I book a seat right next to her and force her to talk to me. Because that's the whole bit with these guys. They don't want Becky Jesus Bible who's raring to go for the holy calling of motherhood. They want to convert people. It's a cult of domesticity. They do it because successfully locking down a self-sufficient woman and ripping off her wings affirms the logic that you don't have to rise to her level. She eventually, naturally, has to lower herself to yours. It's not well executed. Like, at all.
You're a monkey, Derek! You're a monkey, dance monkey, in your little spangly shoes! Smash your cymbals, Simpy! Dance, Derek, dance!
But the plot of Chris Pine's Metaverse Bachelor Squad nails the connection between boomer iconography and anything going on in the modern manosphere, why contemporary men might idealize it, and what it hypothetically offers them. Though that doesn't make the imagery of the 1930s Ziegfeld showgirls make any more sense. Like, maybe a little if you take the movement at its word that they want classic housewives, but you know, most of these guys are actually jonking it to, like, Nami from One Piece. I will also acknowledge the film's effort to center female pleasure as being notable. On the one hand, that there is some desire to make this enjoyable for female audiences when sex is so frequently stigmatized in the thriller horror genre is admirable to some extent. Certainly a far cry from sex is terrifying. No one across history has ever chosen to do this as a job. I refuse to explore this subject with any nuance whatsoever. But that being said, once you actually have the context for those sex scenes, it's extremely difficult to parse why Wilde in particular was so stoked about it in the pre-release press cycle, aside from watching her boyfriend go down on Florence Pugh. The film's third act revealed that Alice is a hostage in a digital simulation which has been designed to distort her memories, completely flips the dynamics of consent in this situation, meaning that out of every man-bad horror film discussed to this point, Don't Worry Darling becomes the only one to graphically depict a successful sexual assault. And it feels completely on accident. That kind of compromising slip-up is endemic of the film's overall sloppiness, juggling too many ideas without delivering anything meaningful about any of them, and in some cases, actively undermining them. And this mess, like many of the movie's problems, is born from the other stumbling block man-bad horror films trip over: the big twist. Sandy got killed by her pimp, but she's secretly alive? Alice is a 1960s housewife, but it's actually a simulation? Harper's being stalked by a naked man, but it's... Look, were you expecting Mpreg? No, you weren't. Please clap. Spoiler culture and metaphor cinema are not always happy bedfellows. Many modern films need to get one over on their audience and set up their twist to be clever and impactful can actively harm the flow of a story. Because Don't Worry Darling is also aping WandaVision's mystery box mini-series story structure, so 3 episodes of interesting plot hooks, 3 episodes of meandering bullshit, 3 episodes of everything deflating as we rush to hit the finish line and set up Multiverse of Madness, too much time and effort is being put into maintaining the mystery to give any truly salient message room to breathe. And the expectation is that you'll look back on all of the wacky visuals like, see, this was actually really clever in hindsight, and this meant this, and I'm sure, there's a reason for all of this meaning this, but what I want is to watch a movie which still feels like it's talking to me, even if it's withholding information, not gassing itself up for how surprising it's going to be later. One of my favorite films ever is George Miller's adaptation of John Updike's The Witches of Eastwick, which I don't think has gotten the modern revaluation it deserves yet. It occupies a weird space, it's not as zany as Beetlejuice or as scary as The Shining, but as a piece of feminist cinema, what it has to say about how relationships get toxic, I personally believe holds up incredibly well. Presenting your audience with a poster that looks like this, featuring a guy named Daryl Van Horn who dresses like that and is played by a man who is this, is probably not exactly the height of deceit.
Would you like to be on the top or the bottom?
But even if you cotton on that something is gonna flip, you don't feel like the movie is spinning its wheels until it can drop the bomb on you. You're watching the unique relationships between Daryl and the protagonists grow and develop, and the closer they get, the more you dread how much he can hurt them when things go wrong. One of the hardest things to wrangle when writing a protagonist or protagonists who get manipulated is that, much like portrayals of men being creeps, a lot of viewers will instinctively roll back and say, well, that's not me. Because especially in the era of irony poisoning, we want very much to believe we're more self-aware than maybe we actually are. We will always know the truth. We will always make the right choices. Nobody's getting one over on us anytime soon, so clearly these fictional characters must be morons. But manipulation, at least where relationships are concerned, is less about picking off idiots than it is honing in on a need. And the titular witches of Eastwick, all feeling abandoned or powerless in some way as they approach middle age, each have distinct but relatable needs. Physical, emotional, sexual, financial, things Daryl eagerly gives them and then some when nobody else is offering. On the surface, this is an arrangement which empowers these women and fills some real vacancy in their lives. So when Daryl baits them into doing something they didn't mean to, it's not the obvious conclusion of stupid people doing stupid things. As with any toxic relationship, it's a scary breach of trust. And the movie being sympathetic to that as something which realistically happens to women everywhere, smart, experienced women, is a pretty progressive take to this day. It is also positively riddled with some astonishingly sexy sex, consent included. I think Don't Worry Darling wants something similar with its core relationship. Look, they read Sylvia Plath, but the problem is that Harry Styles spends the entire movie looking like a dog who just ate a mouthful of bees. This man could not gaslight a Funko Pop.
Look at me, you're my wife. I love you. I love you.
I love you. I love you. I love you.
Now, it's certainly not a bad time to remind female viewers to think critically about old-timey gender roles before completely absolving themselves of agency in a world that hates them for literally doing anything. Like, I know it's so confusing sometimes to be a girl, but even if it's ironically, let's keep our heads on, okay? That's how they get ya.
Don't ask me. I'm just a girl. Right on, say it, sister.
But because we're squatting on that big twist, the logic of how culpable Alice actually is in her own subjugation feels like it's constantly twisting itself into knots. The latest entry in the feminist thriller canon, Companion, which was fine, gave itself an easier starting point by, spoilers, making its lead a literal companion robot who has to literally reprogram herself. And while you get this info a third of the way through, it makes her learning to navigate the world on her own for the rest of the movie kind of charming. Alice, on the other hand, seems to flip-flop between girl wash your face and girl get out of there, depending on whatever point the movie wants to be making at the time. And look, passivity or personal responsibility in a patriarchal society are tricky topics to tackle, especially where the self-preservation instinct of white womanhood is concerned. It's worth the attempt to address. But I don't think the answer is making Olivia Wilde's self-insert secretly red-pilled the whole time in the last 10 minutes.
I've always known.
And then Gemma Chan stabs Chris Pine in the gut and goes,
"It's my turn now."
Like, yay? Is this based? Is the movie over? Did we save feminism from Dita Von Teese? I don't know what's going on. On the subject of white women, I feel like I can't neglect to mention that all of these films have a relationship with race, which I would broadly categorize as weird. Which, look, it's admirable that you don't want these movies to just be about white people. These are every woman's problems, and frankly, they would have rightfully gotten called on that. But how we're actually implementing non-white characters is weird. It's weird. Weird in vibey ways, like why the one black character in Men is the abusive dead husband. Weird in straightforward ways, like Don't Worry Darling's Margaret, who has 2 lines and dies in the first 15 minutes to kickstart Florence Pugh's feminism odyssey. Or weird in just straight up ridiculous ways, like whatever the hell this is.
I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong.
I understand why those catty rich girls make fun of you, cute white affluent heterosexual fashion student who makes her own clothes. I'm black. And I feel like that exchange is kind of a microcosm of why these movies fail to work. There's clearly an understanding that these issues are often intersectional, that they develop from the same places, are enabled by many of the same people, and take new forms to survive shifting cultural attitudes. But rather than explore where they come from or how they intersect within the text, there's just this passing idea that they're co-plights, as if the framework of racial oppression can be used as shorthand to understand misogyny, which they can be concurrent. You know, the whole concept of misogynoir is about how the two overlap for black women in particular. The institutional struggles of a white woman and a black man, I don't take any joy in telling you this, but they are wildly different things. Imagine me telling someone my one shitty date story and that person replying, "I get it, I got called the N-word on the train." It would be fucking bizarre, Edgar! Because when the facts are that the disproportionate fixation on the figure of the missing white woman means that a lot of cases where the victims are not white simply do not get the same level of media attention or closure, these cursory nods towards acknowledging that there is a problem before returning our attention to, you guessed it, missing white women, the fulcrum of nearly a century's worth of Hollywood films about girls in peril, kind of reek of insincerity. And as anyone will tell you, when you get careless with progressive politics and call one thing you're saying into question, you gotta hope and pray that Jenga tower's not gonna buckle all together.
There's no magic button to press that can make men understand what it's like to live as a woman, because these buttons don't exist. Men can't push them. Which, by the way, is to say nothing of the complex gray areas of gender and identity, which this review hasn't touched on, because the film doesn't either. The irony is that the story this film tells is, to a certain degree, about its own failure. Maybe it could attract an audience of the exact men it seeks to pillory in an attempt to enlighten them, but that feels like a long shot. If it were that easy, men wouldn't need to exist.
Much like misogyny itself, there is no easy band-aid to slap onto man-bad horror and make the problem go away. We can't just bar men from making movies starring women, because then you ice out some of the best feminist horror thrillers ever made. Getting more women in there would objectively even the odds, but as we've seen, that does not guarantee an unimpeachably good product. Money will do it. Soho was a post-COVID casualty. Men and Don't Worry Darling did passably at best. But usually when money has the final say, it isn't, we should make good patriarchy horror. It's, we shouldn't be making patriarchy horror at all right now. Because the thing is, nobody sets out to make bad patriarchy horror. Nobody sets out to make bad anything. I don't think Garland or Wright, or Wilde for that matter, have always secretly thought less of women just because they did a lousy job. I think that these really in-demand directors put the time and energy in because they wanted to do something with it. But I also don't think they had many real strong takes in the ballpark of Me Too beyond being able to identify that toxic masculinity has created a lot of problems for women for literally ever. So at that point, it's about the quality of the film, and the only thing worse than a film with nothing to say is a film which says nothing with authority while also riding a banana peel into oncoming traffic. There is a time and a place for easy access discussions about feminism. Mimi Cave's 2022 debut, Fresh, is a fun, if pretty straightforward thriller about the anxieties of modern dating, though it weaves in the concept of cannibalism as an interesting allegory for privilege and control. Yeah, you as a woman will be very familiar with a lot of these fears, but coming to the film with your own history doesn't actively hinder the experience of watching it. Movies like Fresh or Companion aren't pursuing the prestige horror buzz trying to be the most important thing ever, and sometimes being something simple with an opinion is enough. And by that merit, it can be really cathartic to have a punching bag when logic so often fails us in these situations. American Psycho, for as incisive as it is, knows that to an audience that has to put up with guys like Patrick Bateman on the regular, it's really just kind of fun to watch him sweat. Levity's got a necessary place in how we process things that feel inescapable. Sometimes it's humor, sometimes it's beating the ever-loving shit out of Michael Myers. Sometimes it's both. But when you're getting into something as real as assault or abuse or trauma and demanding everyone lock in and take you seriously, you really have to know what your stance is. And rather than constructing a straw man we can all easily identify as a problem without interrogating where he comes from or why anyone would give him space, if your goal is to provoke your audience into actual thought, you gotta be prepared to get into territory that runs the risk of making people feel a bit icky. I nearly let Wrong Organ's 2024 game Mouthwashing pass me by entirely, which was kind of a gut reaction to what felt like half a year of discourse, even though the game came out in September, which, yeah, thank you for spoiling the twist for me by bickering about it, Twitter. But because I got tipped off on what this game is about, I thought that I owed it to myself to take a look before wrapping up this particular essay. The highest compliment I can pay Mouthwashing is that it's the closest any game I've played has come to replicating that yucky, awful sensation you only get from a work like Fire Walk with Me. It is a deeply feel-bad experience. After being dropped in the floating wreckage of a space freighter, it takes about 5 minutes for the player to figure out that acting Captain Jimmy is not just a little stressed out under the circumstances. For more reasons than one, he is what is wrong on the ship. More specifically, there is something very wrong with how he treats the only woman in the crew, Nurse Anya. When I was talking about how Last Night in Soho doesn't fill that gap where the violence would go in any meaningful way, this is what I mean. There is very little ambiguity surrounding the circumstances of Anya's surprise pregnancy, but we observe it indirectly through Jimmy's interactions with his male co-workers, intimidating Daisuke to crawl into a deadly vent for him, drugging Swansea with a drink to steal what he wants while he sleeps, force-feeding Curly in a manner so violent and uncomfortable that Anya physically cannot be in the room. The game is showing us all of the pieces of the puzzle, but in a way that narrows the gap between us and the things we're not being shown, rather than widening it. But unlike Matt Smith or the Green Man, Jimmy isn't some inscrutable animal. We spend large segments of the game digging into his psyche, picking apart what makes him so angry and self-conscious. And the root of his frustration is the constant weight coming down on the crew from the corporation that employs them and eventually abandons them, pressuring him to get things done, keep working, take responsibility. More than anyone else, he really internalizes these standards while he's looking for purpose in his life. It's not great on his mental health, especially after he becomes acting captain, nor is he particularly good at it, but he has to do it to prove that he can. He especially has to do it because of his fixation on his best friend, Curly. As the focal point of the flashback segments, Captain Curly is really the other piece of this narrative puzzle. Curly is nice. He's good at his job, his crew trusts him, he sticks up for Anya when Jimmy bullies her, and tries to redirect Jimmy's dissatisfaction with his life into something constructive. Being this kind of ideal guy, it seems like Curly should have been the hero of this story. But then you consider when the game chooses to reveal Curly's face pre-crash, and how handsome it is compared to Jimmy's, and what he's failing to do when we finally see it. Anya says, "I always believed our worst moments don't make us monsters." And this is Curly's worst moment, but he isn't a monster. Certainly not because of his disability, but not because of his actions either. He clearly has enough wherewithal to understand that what Jimmy did was wrong. But it's like the titular mouthwash. The sugar content, much like Curly's well-intentioned attempt to fix the problem without really taking Jimmy to task, does more damage than it can heal. And even if it destroys 99.9% of germs, how much harm can that 0.1% left unchecked still cause? Unfortunately, Anya knows. Anya can never unsee the dead pixel in the window projection, because that margin of 0.1% is all it takes. But Curly's got the privilege of only seeing the big picture. And once he loses his physical autonomy and subsequently Jimmy's respect, he finds out the painful way what capitalism has conditioned a guy like Jimmy to believe control and responsibility really look like. It is a gross fact of life. It is. That the people who inflict pain upon us are human beings, that their damage can come from the same place as ours, that we are capable of being good people and meaning well while still failing to do enough to protect each other, is difficult to confront. And some people get upset when you say that because they believe it creates some kind of equivalence between us and them. But rather than interpret that as us being no better than the abusers, we have to accept that what separates the two isn't personhood, but choice.
Can you see any of yourself in him? I can certainly get pathetically jealous. I can get insecure and self-pitying to a vicious degree. I can act aggressive and defensive in the moment, then regret it the next day. Those are the kinds of awful, clinging emotions I wanted to explore with Jimmy. I always want to be writing about uncomfortable things, about aspects of myself or others that I find distressing, shameful, contradictory. Things that I think a lot of people can identify with but aren't usually put into words.
Men are not inherently evil. To give into gender essentialism and genuinely argue that they are means we absolve them of responsibility when they fuck up, when they make a bad movie, when someone genuinely gets hurt. Oh, guess Jimmy couldn't help himself, it's just those manly urges, boys will be boys. Do you hear yourself? No. Is it the 1930s? Jimmy is an asshole, but whether it's because of society or insecurity or capitalism, Jimmy made multiple calculated choices to be an asshole, and he can't even own it. Compare him to a guy like Swansea, who is set up as a stereotypical creep, an unattractive, older, angry addict, but still has the bandwidth to think critically about his life, about the difference between the expectations society set for him and the expectations he set for himself, and which he can commit to without hurting other people in the process. When all is lost, Jimmy can finally bring himself to apologize to almost everyone for what he's done to them. To Daisuke, to Curly, even to Swansea. But if he thinks of Anya, it's not as a human being he's done anything wrong to. Just some object he took out his anger on. And unfortunately, the good people who cared about her let it happen. Mouthwashing crafts a real conversation about where these attitudes come from and how they slip past notice, what the toxicity of capitalism culture does to the psyche of insecure men, and how other men can fail to take it seriously. Sure, the discourse is annoying, but getting people talking about it is how you get people to learn. This is a game that hurts, but if you've ever been passive in a situation like Anya's where someone needed you to do something, as people very often are, the game tells you to your face, I hope it hurts.
At the risk of sounding pretentious, the medium is the message. I hope certain people in the gaming industry play this game. I hope they see themselves. And I hope it hurts. I hope it hurts.
Let's be real with ourselves. For as much as art has the genuine power to impact our culture, no institutional crisis has ever or will ever be solved by plopping a bunch of politicians down in front of the Barbie movie. Yeah, I guess it is impossible to be a woman. Also, I should buy a 2024 Chevy Blazer. We cannot consume our way out of this one, girlies. So when you're talking about heavy shit, the people who want to hear you are, ironically, coming to you to give those dark feelings a safe place to air out. It doesn't all have to be a positive conversation, you know? It might not get you anywhere. You just have to be allowed to feel about it. And I think the best of feminist horror, the stuff that really rips you open, comes from a mutual understanding that both you and the film have the same amount of room to feel your feelings. Maybe it'll get ugly or thorny or nasty in a way women are frequently not allowed to be, but that's what horror is for. But you have to accept at a certain point the people who need to hear you, whether it be other women or the swing state contingent of guys who think they're doing pretty good with this feminism thing, might get their feelings hurt. And with any tough conversation, sometimes saying what you need to say exposes the people who don't actually want to do any better than they're currently doing. That's the risk, but it's a necessary risk. I think that's why The Substance resonated with people last year, because it is an angry narrative. The Substance is even less subtle than Soho, but subtlety is not the point. The point is using the shock and discomfort of body horror to grab you by the shoulders and rattle you and scream at you. If the way they tear us down is such basic, widespread goddamn knowledge, then why do we let them do it to us? For better or worse, studios are going to want more like The Substance. It's honestly probably going to do a lot for feminist horror after all of these high-profile flops. But ironically, nobody wanted to be the one responsible for The Substance in the first place. Universal dropped its distribution rights like a bag of wet socks. Not because it says anything controversial, but because of, on top of just being absolutely nauseating to watch, it's not interested in toothless feel-good rhetoric or outsmarting its audience. It's interested in being loud and absurd and angry, letting the people who need to be angry with it, and telling people why they should be angry when they don't even know it yet. We want this body horror movie about unattainable beauty standards to be less grotesque. Alright, cool, let's learn nothing from this experience. That's maybe the point where I struggle to let these films off the hook, because there is an interminable case of smugness afflicting man-bad horror. Look, I'm addressing a problem. Look, I'm aware of the buzzwords. I'm reaching across the aisle. Look, I know this. And you can't have that kind of necessary open conversation with someone waiting for you to congratulate them on things you learned when you were 16, especially not when there's so much less at stake for popular directors, particularly male ones. So to be given the space and not only waste it on a one-sided dialogue, but jeopardize it, feels extremely disingenuous as far as anyone's personal interests are concerned. It contributes about as much as sugary mouthwash. Even before the results of the 24 election, the social pendulum was swinging in a very scary direction. Not like it isn't always scary, but your body, my choice is, a lot. It's a lot on top of a lot.
Hilton, what's the weather doing?
It's not great.
You kind of learn to filter it out on a regular basis to not go insane while being on the internet, but you can't sit through rock bottom moments like the fictional abuse victim is insufficiently fuckable pretty much once a month without feeling your brain splinter like a peanut shell. Which does break you a bit, you know? You gotta celebrate all the progress that was made to get you here, but it's also fair to look around and be mad when it's still not enough, especially when it starts to backslide. And I imagine that if you don't live like that on a daily basis, if you've never gone on a date and worried about entirely risking your personal safety by trusting the wrong man at the wrong time, discovering that's frequently the case, if not worse, for half the world's population is gonna send a bit of a shock through your system. I get it. But throwing up your hands like, well, I've come to the academic conclusion that men are sex-crazed monsters, is this guy bothering you, queen, especially as another man as if it absolves you, isn't just the bare minimum, it's counteractive. Look back through history and you realize when people start coming to that conclusion, shit stops getting done. Men stop trying to learn because, well, they passed the basic course and expect that it's gonna impress me. Yeah. I'm aware that there's a problem, motherfucker. My duty of care only goes so far in the situation. Yours a little bit less so. Because no, not all men are secretly trying to lure you back to their house to hack you into pieces. Not all men are gonna harass women online or try to grab them at clubs. But the thing that everyone else can see, the reason that there's so much trepidation, the reason they all pick the bear, is that not all men will, but any man could. Not just men who say all the wrong things, I know to steer clear of them, and trust me, there's plenty, but the ones who say all the right things are still a risk too. If it were as easy as pointing at creeps and saying, well, man bad, why didn't this conversation end in the 1940s? You couldn't recognize yourself in that cardboard cutout of a creep. Like, look at him. I don't think anybody would. But I don't get any catharsis out of beating him. I don't benefit from someone telling me they know he's a problem. I just look at him and I feel sorry for you. Because you don't even realize he should frighten you more than he could ever frighten me. What made him, it hates me, and I know that damn well, but it wants you. You don't even know how scared you should be of seeing him look back at you in the mirror one morning without even noticing the difference. Thank you for watching, everybody. This has been Man Bad Horror. It's one that I've had in the tank for a while, and I hope that I was able to get all of my feelings across in a way that was somewhat entertaining, in spite of how heavy the subject matter is. If you thought that this was interesting, if you want to hear more about the process, if you're wondering why David Lynch didn't come up at all, because there was a reason for that, please head over to my Patreon. There will be a post-mortem write-up that sort of follows up on all of that. If you are a Patreon member, you can also join our Discord, where we have monthly movie nights, where I get on mic and yap about whatever the hell is going on. Send a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. Unfortunately, these things do actually go a really long way in getting the video out there for more folks to see, and I know times are tough right now, so that's something you can do for no cost, just to help the channel keep moving and growing. Especially because part of the reason it takes me so long to get these videos out is because I have to rely on other sources of income. That being said, there is a short in the works as we speak. I am currently banging out the script, and hopefully it'll be in real production by the end of the month. It's one that people have been asking me for a while. Not that one, but a different one. But you know, it's just great to be posting again. Thank you everyone so much for your support, and you will be hearing from me very, very soon. Right, oh yeah, this video was sponsored by Squarespace.